Well, you look great. It's nice to meet you finally.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you finally, too.
Hello, my name is Suzanne van Doorn. I'm owner and founder of Mindfunda.com, a daily blog about spirituality, mythology, and psychology, and everything that makes your life a little bit better. You can sign up on my blog for my newsletter, and you will get yourself a free ebook about mutual dreaming, that is, dreaming with another person. I've had some experiences, I've did some research about it, I've written a book about it, I've collected experiences of myself and other dreamers. And if you sign up, you'll get that book as a free download from me. So please sign up. And while you're at it, please subscribe to my YouTube channel here down below, because I'll be loading up lots of good interviews. Today, my guest is Jean Raffa. Jean Raffa is a former television producer, and she withdrew from that profession to become a full-time writer, writing about spirituality and Jungian psychology. She's written a number of books: The Bridge to Wholeness, Dream Theaters of the Soul, and tonight we are going to talk about Wilbur Award winning Healing the Sacred Divide. And you can also visit Jean Raffa at her website, jeanraffa.com. Hello, Jean. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Well, I'm good. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you, too.
Mm-hmm. Your dream, your book starts with a big dream about your life's work. Can you tell us about that dream and how it has affected you?
I'd be happy to. It was a dream that I had when I was 10 years old. In the dream, I was walking down some railroad tracks, and they veered off into the horizon, and I was all alone. And in the dream, I was thinking, I recognize this place. I've been here before. And sure enough, as I was walking, I realized I had lived near those railroad tracks when I was 5 years old, and my father had taken me for a walk to see what the railroad tracks looked like. And he said there were woods on either side of the track, and there were hobos in the woods, and I should never go into the woods by myself. I should be very careful. I should never walk on the tracks by myself ever, because the trains could crush me. So I'm remembering this when I'm in this dream as a 10-year-old. I'm remembering this, and I'm wondering why I'm here now. Why am I on these railroad tracks that I once walked on with my father? And then suddenly I hear this voice from behind me going, Jean, Jean. So I turn around and I look behind me, and it's the Lone Ranger. No, it's not. It's Tonto. I got ahead of myself. So it's Tonto. Did you know the Lone Ranger and Tonto?
Yes.
Okay. From my childhood, the Lone Ranger was a cowboy hero. Yeah. He was my hero, and I loved him. So Tonto's there, and I'm very excited. So I turn around and I look back, and he says, Jean, come with me. The Lone Ranger wants to see you. So I was very excited. Now, there were still woods on both sides of the tracks, but there was a steep embankment I was on. So I turned around and followed him back, and then he walked down the embankment, and then there was the Lone Ranger. And behind him was his beautiful white horse, Silver, and behind Silver, those dark, dark woods. So the Lone Ranger said, stand there. So I stood there, backed up against the embankment, and stood there, and he said, nothing. He reached into his holster, and he pulled out his gun, and he shot me. And I felt the impact of the shot, and I began to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. Am I going to die? And I was terrified, and I started screaming. And I woke up to my mother's voice saying, Jean, Jean, wake up. It's okay. It's only a dream. You've just had a dream. And I thought to myself, I am 10 years old, and I will never forget this dream. Well, I didn't forget it. But I never went back to it until I was 47, 30 years later. and I joined a Jungian study group. It was called Centerpoint, and it was an organized course of 4 years of study of Jungian psychology, and you met with a group of like-minded thinkers once a week for 4 years, and you studied Jungian psychology, and there was a course of study and activities for you to engage in. And the first activity was share a dream that you had at some point in your life that felt very important to you. So I immediately thought of my Lone Ranger and Tonto dream. And so when it was my turn, I started telling that dream. And as I was telling it, I realized that I was struggling to hold back tears, and I was almost gasping with emotion. And I thought, oh my word, what is going on with me? Why am I feeling so emotional? And I'm going to embarrass myself in front of these people, and they're going to see me crying. And up until then, I'd been very good at hiding my emotions, and I thought of that as a strength. And I didn't want to cry in front of them, you know. So I realized I was going to, and that made me realize there was really something important about that dream, some other story underneath the regular story and persona I was showing the world that had a lot of power. And so I decided then and there to begin to explore my dreams. I committed myself to dream work. I've written over 4,600 dreams. I've worked with probably at least a fourth of them, around that number. And within a year of starting to write my dreams down, I was a different person, and my life was completely different. I joined that study group because I knew there was something more. I wasn't happy with what I had accomplished or what I was doing. I was a college professor. I had been as you mentioned, a television producer before that. And yet none of these jobs had been fulfilling to me at all. And I knew there was something else in me, but something was missing. I didn't know what it was. Well, I began to find out in my dreams. And because of those dreams, I quit teaching, being a college professor. I began to write, which is my passion, I realize now. I realized that self-knowledge and self-discovery is also my passion. And being true to that and writing my books has led me to 2 more books, to living a life in which I feel I'm doing what I was supposed to be doing what I'm best suited to do, definitely feeling that my life has deep meaning. And it's so affirming and reassuring to me. And that's all because of that one dream and what it taught me. And I could go on and on if you want me to about other things I learned about it, but I won't unless you want to hear that.
No, that's a beautiful story and very inspiring for everybody. The title of your book, Healing the Sacred Divide,
Yes.
here it is an intriguing title. Can you tell us more about the division, that polarization that needs to be healed in us, in our culture, in the way we raise our children?
Yes. When I talk about the sacred divide, I'm talking about the fact that, to me, all of life is sacred. I feel that life, the mystery, it's a miracle. Just being alive, being able to talk, being able to communicate with you, being conscious and aware. To me, that's just a sacred mystery that I'll never understand. But it seems to me, and I've read this from other people, that all of life is enveloped in a sort of a matrix of spirit, you might call it, and that it's all sacred, all holy. And yet, we are made in such a way, perhaps because we have a left hemisphere of the brain and a right hemisphere of the brain, we're made in such a way that we tend to see well, this side of me is good. I like the fact that I'm an extrovert, say. But this side of me I don't like. I shouldn't be like that. That's not good. And so what happens is that as children, we grow up being taught things are good or bad. And so we start disowning lots of qualities in ourselves.
Yeah.
And the more of these qualities that we disown, the more we tend to repress, first of all, positive potential, things within us that might give us great joy, the way I repressed my ability to write, just because I thought I could never earn a living with it. And we also, those things that we repress take on a lot of power and a lot of energy and become shadow energy. And they are things in ourselves that come out in ways that we don't like. So in a way, we're separated from ourselves. So that divide begins with an inner separation from the conscious self that we are and the unconscious self and who we really are underneath. So we've got to heal that division between the conscious and the unconscious self. And yet that divide between them is sacred, because the very conflict that we feel between this part of me and that part of me is what spurs me on to do my inner work, to reflect on who I am, to pay attention to who I really am, and to discover my true self. So the divide is sacred, and the opposites are sacred because they cause us to try to heal that divide. Am I making myself clear?
Yes, but because to me it's like alchemy. The energy between opposites creates a tension that needs to be addressed, that needs to merge into a transformation.
Exactly. It is alchemical in nature, and that's what the alchemists were trying to do with their work. And it is like alchemy. It's about letting those opposites meet and finding a way to integrate them in my conscious personality without letting them become powerful unconscious factors in my personality that create dysfunction. So I need to heal these things in myself that I don't understand. And there are all kinds of opposites, masculine and feminine. I have a masculine side and a feminine side. And this is what the book talks about uniting in this sacred space in the middle of conversation and integration and interaction, uniting these opposites, creating bridges, creating dialogues, creating conversations between one's conscious and unconscious self, and between oneself and others. And that's the way to heal ourselves, and it's also the way we begin to promote healing in the world, just by our very behavior and by our willingness to see opposite sides and entertain them and carry on dialogues with them.
Yeah, your book is divided into two parts. In the first part, you talk about the 8 mistakes in our cultural concept of God. And part 2 is about the 9 gifts to create our own inner image of God. And I really liked what you said in your introduction about God being everywhere. It's what I always, when I was a kid, conceived as God. That is the light of energy in all people around the world.
Yes.
That was my concept of God when I was a kid, and my father was always very worried about me because he was Catholic, and I should pray and I should go to church, and the poor man. He's passed away now, but when I look back at the conversations I've had with him, I think, Daddy, you meant so, because he was genuinely concerned about my well-being after my death. But
dear.
yeah. A lot of times, creative people like you, there's an ease with the acceptance of magic, and I didn't think it was a surprise that you were a former television producer. And how, because you have been a television producer, my conclusion is that you are a very visual person. Is that ability to think in images, has that helped you?
Yeah, very much. I don't believe I started out as being a very visual person. I sort of discovered the value of visual things over the years, of visualization and imagination and imagery. Originally, I was very much of a student, left brain, logic, academic type. But over the years, I began to value the inner life. And as I started working with my dreams, I really realized that those images in my dreams were not necessarily to be taken literally, but that, like for me, scriptural stories, they were images. They were that were filled with underlying meaning. Metaphors. They were metaphors for things about the spiritual life, aspects of the spiritual life that were far more important than just some sort of a literal explanation. And so these images had a wealth of information in them that literal thinking could not give one. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, so, is an image. It's extraordinarily packed with meaning, symbolic meaning. So as I began to understand that from my dream work and began to think in images, it came to the point that everything I saw around me, I could look at it as a metaphor. I could look at it as a literal fact that I was looking at, but I could also explore the deeper meaning, and I could see that a synchronicity in which I see an image on the computer and a person calls me on the phone and talks about the same exact thing. There's some power in that, in the fact that I see meaning in that image. And seeing the meaning in the image has helped me understand myself psychologically a lot more than if I just sat down and tried to explore the facts of my life. But the images have shown me the underlying story beneath the facts.
When I read your book, Healing the Sacred Divide, and you told the readers that it took you 9 years to write this in a contemplation, meditation, and I was triggered by the similarity of the process you went through with Carl Jung. Like Carl Jung, you stepped out of the environment you knew and you began to use active imagination and inner exploration to resolve an inner unhappiness that you perceived. And like Jung, who tries in the Red Book, who tries to unite the spirit of death with the spirit of today's world, I wonder, is it, in your opinion, the union of two opposites, is that the key to happiness?
I believe it is. In Jung's case, in my case, we went from being very academically oriented, very logical, very literal-minded, very factual, because he was a scholar and I'm a scholar. And that really is only one half of our story. And if we don't recognize the other half, which is the life of the right hemisphere of the brain, which is about imagination, symbol, image, subjective, personal meaning, emotion, we can try very hard as the literal left-brained, linear mindset of our culture would have us focus on, emphasize, but we do it at the peril of the wholeness, our fullest potential. We have the potential to be so much more than just a rational thinker. We also have the capacity to feel deeply and to learn compassion and to learn love and to see underlying meaning in our lives and in the life of the world and the universe. And many of us are born with a hunger for that, just like you were born as a young child. You knew there was a lot more to what you thought of as sacred than just the dogma of your church. Your father didn't know that, but you did. You knew that there was so much more to your life, and you were compelled to find that meaning. And I was the same kind of person, as was Carl Jung, somebody who knew that that literal, logical spirit of the times is not enough, that there's a spirit of the depths that calls out to us and that feels very sacred to us. So, yes, in my mind, if one does not notice the internal conflicts between what the world is trying to teach us and what we ourselves feel, I don't see how anybody can be happy unless I can't be. I could not be happy. For me, recognizing the outer and the inner, recognizing the specialness of myself as well as the significance of otherness has been crucial to my development and growth and self-knowledge and happiness. So yes, I would say that totally healing those opposites, dealing with them, is the key to happiness. It certainly is for people like me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You in your book you mentioned the importance of tribes, and we live now more than ever in a global melting pot with internet, Facebook, LinkedIn, creating global tribes. Do you think that globalization of tribes like that is now happening is a step towards knowledge and self-acceptance?
I certainly do. For myself, I started writing a blog over 5 years ago, and I was astonished at the fellow soul travelers out there. I had no idea. I was really terrified of technology, but in keeping with my desire to unite the opposites, I decided that it was very important for me, who tends to be inner-directed and intuitive, to also explore the technical world of the internet and the computer. And plus my publisher said, you really need to do that. And I really resisted it. I didn't want to, because I had a lot of preconceived notions about the internet that you see even nowadays, about the bad things about it. And of course there are bad things about everything, right? There's a positive and negative to every archetype. It can be used well or misused terribly. So I was expecting and dwelling on the possible misuses of technology and didn't really understand the value of it. And what I found out was when I started blogging and when I started tweeting and joining Facebook, that I have this huge tribe that's international. It's around the world of people that I never knew existed, who think very much like I do, who are fascinated by the same kinds of things I are. And I feel like in involving myself in the internet, I've found my tribe. Mm-hmm. I've met very few people in my life like myself. And yet, in the space of 5 years, I've met hundreds of them, and it's just been the most thrilling thing ever. So yes, I love the tribal sense, that web that has been created on the internet, that web of connections, and I think it's just crucial to the advancement of human consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Like a sort of web of Indra.
Exactly, the diamond net or web of Indra or grandmother spider's web. Oh. It's, in these ancient symbolic ways of explaining the realities of life, there was deep, profound meaning. They weren't literal myths, but they were absolutely true in terms of the soul, in terms of the meaning of life, the underlying meaning of Indra's diamond net or web, grandmother spider's web. It's real, and we're discovering it literally on the internet now, and I find that enormously exciting and very, very hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is. It is like exploring those little tiny lines and walking them and discovering, hey, there's a diamond and it reflects. Hey, it's very, very good. Your book is divided in two parts, and part one tells about how God's images have evolved, and part two, you describe 9 wisdom gifts of a new integrated God image. With each gift, you describe a cosmic dialogue, a manifestation of the divine feminine in that gift, and a personal story about how you lived and experienced these gifts. Why 9 gifts?
Good question. It was an intuitive knowing, an intuitive choice for me. As I began to work with the symbols and the images that showed up in my life, the number 9 showed up many times. Mm-hmm. I went through a dark night experience, a spiritual crisis, really, that while I was performing normally on the outside of my life, inside I was absolutely miserable. I was undergoing a very profound spiritual time of doubt and pain and conflict, and it lasted 9 years until suddenly, when I joined that Jungian study group, the light bulb started popping on, and things got lighter and lighter and lighter. The darkness began to fall away and the light began to come in. So that 9 years, a baby takes 9 months of gestation before the new life is produced. The 9 years of my dark night were incredibly fruitful, because after I went through them without doing anything rash, making any terrible choices, just tolerating that tension, my creativity began to emerge, and I began to write my books, and I began to find the joy that I had been looking for all along. So the number 9, as a symbol of rebirth and regeneration and transformation, has been intuitively very important to me. And so when I began thinking about what happens as we are transformed, as the psyche begins to become integrated, and what these issues are that we need to face and integrate, I began to see that there were these enormous rewards of dealing with each of these 9 issues. And so there could be many more than 9 gifts, but 9 of them were very important to me, and those were the 9 that I wrote about, because the number 9 was symbolic.
Mm-hmm. I will list them now for people who want to read your book. The first is holistic perception. The second, transforming light. The third one is acceptance of the shadow. Very important one. The fourth one is emotional integrity, partnership, balance, sovereignty, meaning, and mandala consciousness. Those are the 9 lessons, and really the book is very well worth reading. I really loved reading the cosmic dialogue that concludes each gift, because in the cosmic dialogue, after each chapter, you have the god and the goddess, and they are arguing about really profound, English is not my native language, they're really usual things. They argue around the house, and you didn't do that, and you didn't clean that, and it's very, very appealing. But one of the finest stories about the goddess is that she's telling the god, and here she is Mother Earth, she's telling God that the plants in her garden looked so good because they had good relationships with each other. And I like that idea so much that I wanted to ask you, can you tell us something more about that? The idea of everything in the universe communicating, even plants.
Well, we go back to that diamond net of Indra, or that web. Again, these connections that we make with each other are sacred connections. And I think intuiting the interconnectedness of life was largely why we have this religious impulse within us, the archetype of the self. Jung called it our God image, or the religious impulse. And we want to connect with the sacred. And that's why we create God images in the first place. Because we sense that there is something, we're made this way to sense that connecting, relating, having relationships with otherness is a sacred path to our own wholeness. And we're made such that we kind of know that unconsciously, even though we may reject it consciously. So these stories that I told, these little cosmic dialogues between God and Goddess, are essentially reflections of humanity's own God images, our ideas about what the sacred is like, our ideas about what is sacred and what is not. And for many years, thousands of years, Goddess was the preeminent God image because we were so connected to the earth. We were so connected to nature and the life and cycles of plants and growth and death. And then Goddess began to be replaced by God. And for the next 5,000 years, up to now, humanity has been largely emphasizing the masculine side of divinity. And so these stories for the last 5,000 years have emphasized the masculine aspects of our ideas about God, which tend to be about separation, distance. God's up there, we're down here. Goddess is not as important as God because God is sacred, and Goddess is related to the physical, and the physical body is flawed, we used to hear in some of our religious teachings, and keeps us from being pure and holy. So our God images have been evolving because we are evolving. We're becoming more and more conscious. And the more we can connect with God and Goddess, with the masculine and feminine aspects of divinity that we're born with. The two great foundations of life are masculine principle and feminine principle. And you can't have one without the other. It doesn't work that way. And yet we've been so focused on the masculine. So what I was trying to show in those cosmic dialogues was that the evolution of my own God image, the fact that as a child, God was supposed to be all masculine, and yet before I heard that, I felt the feminine, earthy aspects of Goddess. Didn't even have a name for it, just thought of it as spirit being everywhere, as you did. So it's sort of a metaphor, these little dialogues. Also, I wanted to lighten the book up a little bit because there's a lot of serious stuff in there, and I thought it would be fun for people to sort of see how my God image has evolved over my lifetime, as humanity's has as a whole. So I think that becoming conscious is about connecting more and more with each other, relationships with ourselves, relationships with the earth, relationships with each other. It's all about relationships, really, and connecting and dialoguing and communicating, and that's all sacred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my presentation of last year, Dreaming the World Tree, I showed a film of the trees, big trees that connect through the roots of their trees, connecting together under the earth to help each other. There are mother trees that help the younger trees and send them good stuff, and when they die, they give their heritage to the other trees. So that stood out for me. Those plants relate to each other. The goddess saying that. I said, yes, I know that is true.
I would just like to make a comment there. I don't know if you know this or not, but Carl Jung said that tree of life is a symbol of that archetypal self, that the wholeness within us, not just our core, but our circumference, because we have spiritual strivings like the branches. We have that, reach up into the sky where we think of heaven as being. We have that trunk in the center, which represents the physical body that connects to the heavens. And we have those roots that would symbolize the unconscious. So that's a perfect image. And I love it that you did a workshop on that, because you could mine that for tons of meaning and many layers of meaning for everybody's psyche.
Yeah. To me, your whole book is a love letter to Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, the earliest known partner of God. Can you tell us something more about Sophia?
I think Sophia, to me, is another name for one of those two foundations of life that I mentioned. They're also the two foundations of the psyche, the masculine principle and the feminine principle. And the masculine principle has traditionally been associated with otherness. Spirit is otherness, the unknown, the mysterious, the unconscious. Whereas the feminine principle has been associated with the body, the physical life, relationships, receptivity, connection, as we've been talking about. So think about the Jews, for example, when they were stranded for 40 years in the desert. They followed a pillar of light that led them around, that they thought of as the Shekinah or Shekinah, forgive me to those who understand how to pronounce this in Hebrew appropriately. They understood that God is that Sophia is God with us. It's the divinity in us, the feminine embodiment of divinity, as opposed to the masculine aspect of spirituality that has to do with the aspects of deity that we haven't yet learned to connect with, that are still a mystery. So to me, the Sophia represents the wisdom of living, the wisdom of being in this body, the wisdom, the sacred, holy wisdom of being alive and having these senses and this ability to connect physically. She represents soul. She represents God with us and God within us. And to me, I find myself very drawn to that aspect of deity in the second half of my life. Having spent the first half of my life in very detached, spiritual, logical musings, I'm really enjoying coming home to Sophia. But it doesn't have to be either or. It's both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I was a little kid, I used to pretend that I would call Mother Mary, because God was such, he was a man way high up above with a beard. And Jesus, well, but Mother Mary, she had a child. Because I used to pretend that I called her, and then I would tell her all my troubles, and then sometimes an answer came up in me, and other times it was just okay. And after discovering Sophia, I think I was communicating with my inner sense of Sophia. So that's why that's one of the many reasons why I like your book so much.
Thank you.
One of the 9 gifts is the acceptance of the shadow. And in your book, you talk about how dreams can help you accept and integrate your shadow. Can you share a dream with us that helped you to accept and integrate your shadow?
I'd love to. I talk about one dream in the book, but I think I'd like to share maybe the very earliest dream that I had about the shadow once I started recording my dreams. I think this may have been the 9th dream I ever had. And I was really afraid to reflect on my inner life because I was afraid I'd find out something terrible about myself. In other words, I was afraid of my shadow. I didn't know what it was, and I thought, oh no, it's going to be horrible. I'll find out something terrible. But I was determined because I knew that connecting with my own shadow was part of my healing process. So I had this dream in which I was walking along a road, and I'm looking to the right, and I see this woman, tall, skinny, dark hair, and she's exercising very intensely on the side of the road. And she's bringing her knee up to her forehead, and boy, she's really, she's really going at it, sit-ups. And I'm looking at her, and there's something about it that I really didn't like. So I sort of continued walking, and then I turned around and decided, all right, I'm ready to go back. Turned around to go back, and there was this woman. She was standing up. She slammed a garage door behind her and in front of me so that I couldn't get past her. I couldn't move on in my journey. And I said, well, before I said anything, I was afraid. I was afraid of her. She seemed very intimidating, and she was really challenging me. And I never have liked conflict very much. And so probably my first thought was, oh no, what am I going to do? And just to be afraid. And my second thought was, she is a woman just like me. I don't need to be afraid of her. What is she going to do? So I stood up to her, and I looked at her, and I balled up my fists, and I said, you better get out of my way, or I'm going to punch your lights out. Well, immediately she started to laugh, and she said, I hate that expression. And I realized how silly it sounded, and I started laughing too, and suddenly we were friends because I had faced her, and I had told her what I thought of her. Get out of my way, you're in my way, and I don't like it. And she, in doing that, in confronting her and facing her, we had become friends. And I was lightening up and laughing. So what I learned when I really looked at that dream closely was that what I didn't like about her was what I didn't like about myself. As you can see, I'm a pretty intense person. And she was working very hard to be perfect. And in those days, I was a very intense perfectionist. I thought that the only way to live in this world was to be as perfect as I could, to do everything as right as I could. And a lot of women tend to have that same kind of shadow.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, of course, it's no fun. And as long as you have it and don't acknowledge it, it can be a real problem for you because you stress out and get filled with anxiety. Oh no, I'm not perfect. Oh no, what if I make a mistake? Oh no, my house has a speck of dust on it. You stress out, and then you spend your life struggling and feeling anxious, and that's not a good thing. So seeing that intensity in me, bringing it into my consciousness was a huge gift. Because suddenly I saw, hey, I'm not perfect. I never will be perfect. When I start subjecting myself to this intense perfectionism, I began to see it. And I began to realize, hey, back off. You're being too intense. You can be bothersome to others. You can even intimidate others with your intensity. the way this shadow woman in my dream was intimidating me. That can be very intimidating to people. It can be very annoying to people. It can turn people off. And I didn't want to do that to people. And I didn't realize maybe I do that with my intense perfectionism. So that was a gift that showed me you are an intense perfectionist. You might want to back off and be more aware of it. And so I notice my perfectionism, and when I'm allowing it, when it's making me anxious, I can back off now. And I couldn't do that for the first 47 years of my life. I didn't know I was that. I couldn't back off from it, and I was filled with anxiety much of the time. So it was huge for me to see that.
Mm-hmm. It's very recognizable for me, that perfectionism. And it's I have two children, and unfortunately it's the way we raise children at school. Hey, you are not supposed to make faults, and I get a lesser grade when you have lots of questions wrong. And I have two very adorable children. They are not perfect, and sometimes I just think, well, maybe I should let go of things. So I started to create those little books of compliments for each day. This one is for one of my children. Each day I write down at least 3 things that I think they did really, really good, and I lay them down at the dinner table, and they are always so happy when they jump at it and they start reading.
Oh, what
So
wonderful idea. I love that.
Yeah, because I was raised by a perfectionist, and being perfectionist, it's no fun. Like you said, it's we should quit that, all of us.
I agree.
Yeah.
Jung said it's not about perfectionism, it's about completion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfectionism is only one side of the continuum. It's not humanity. It's not, maybe you can perfect your ideas and your theories, or you think you can if you're an academic, but that doesn't work in real life. It's about connecting with the parts of you that aren't perfect and accepting your humanity. That's how you come to terms with yourself. That's how you help your children come to terms with them, is accepting their imperfections and loving them anyway. And it's just brilliant that you came up with that strategy to teach that.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about the mandorla consciousness. Here on the front side of your book, is it on? Yeah, it's here. You see 2 mandalas, and they are joined, and that part is called the mandorla consciousness. Can you explain the idea behind this?
Yes, the mandala is the round circle. Jung said that was a soul image. So here we have 2 circles, and they've begun to merge. And if you can't see it, it makes a sort of an almond shape in the center. It's not clear in the bottom image, but it's more clear up here. Yeah. That's that overlapping space between the opposites.
Yeah.
That is the space where dialogue occurs between the opposites, where we begin to consciously integrate differing opinions, differing beliefs, differing religions, differing ways of being, differing parts of ourselves. And because we change when we do begin to integrate the opposites, that space of transformation. So for one who truly wants to live in this sacred, as well as understand it and teach it to others, this is a symbol, this mandorla in the center. And by the way, mandorla means almond, and that in Italian, I believe, or Latin, and that's why it's almond shaped. This is a holy place of transformation, and it's very sacred. It's where imagination and logic meet. It's where masculine and feminine meet, and new life always emerges from there. So to see my path as a middle way between the opposites And to be consciously aware of that as much as I can in my life puts me back into that sense of the sacredness of my life and the desire to be more patient, more human, more accepting, and carry on dialogues with otherness of all kinds, other people, other beliefs. So I'm all about staying in that holy space of transformation and evolution into greater consciousness. And that's what it means to me. Mandorla consciousness means being so aware of that, the holy space of integration between opposites, that one lives that way, one walks that way.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful concept.
Thank you.
It's very appealing.
Original to me, sorry, but it's a very ancient concept that I'm just rewriting and in terms that mean something to me.
Yeah. We started the interview with a dream of yours, and I wanted to ask you, what is the importance of dream work in your eyes for people? Not just for you, not just for me, but for everybody.
Well, I thank you for so many wonderful questions about dream work. I guess I've sort of probably indirectly answered that question in my many examples and in your many questions. Dream work has for me been essentially a spiritual practice. And I know that we think of spiritual practices as being reading scriptures and praying. But I think that taking these inner dramas and messages from my very core of myself seriously is a way of communicating with what's sacred. And I find it much more fulfilling than the way I used to, than the spiritual practices I had in the first half of my life. I find this way of taking my dreams seriously, to me it's taking the wisdom of the soul, Sophia's wisdom, seriously. It's taking the sacred within myself seriously. It's recognizing that, I heard all this in my church many times, God lives within you. Well, what did that mean? It meant nothing to me. How do I know God's voice? How do I hear God's voice? What does it mean that God lives within me? I don't feel God. God doesn't talk to me. In a way, deity does talk to us, but it talks to us in ways that we haven't learned to value in that right brain language of symbol and image and emotion. So when we take Sophia and her right brain language of the human unconscious seriously, in other words, when we take our dreams seriously, we begin to feel the God within. So my sense of dreams is that, my knowing of dreams is that for me, it is a profoundly spiritually transforming practice. And I would recommend it highly to anybody who feels so inclined, who's curious about their dreams, to make it a regular spiritual practice. And when approached in that vein, it is transforming.
Okay, well, thank you for this wonderful, inspiring interview. I wanted to ask you, this is the book, Healing the Sacred Divide. Please go out and buy one if you haven't already. I wanted to ask you to conclude this interview with you reading a quote from your book.
This quote is by Robert A. Johnson, who is a Jungian analyst. He's still alive. He has written about the mandorla. He's written about inner work. He's written about the inner masculine and inner feminine, and he's been a very powerful spiritual guide for me. And so I'd like to read what he says. The message is unmistakable. Our own healing proceeds from that overlap of what we call good and evil, light and dark. It is not that the light element alone does the healing. The place where light and dark begin to touch is where miracles arise. This middle place is a mandorla.
Wow. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. This was fun.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye, Jean.
Bye-bye.